Hello and welcome. As most of you know, this is our daily devotionals, which we started 4 or 5 years ago, back in the days of COVID. And it was basically the only thing I could think of at the time because for the first 2 weeks, our church was closed, and I knew that most people would begin to go through a spiritual drought. And so the only thing I could think to do was connect virtually by the internet. And of course, it's grown into something that's become a regular part of your and my life. And so I'm thankful that you're there. And hopefully you'll benefit from the things I have to share this week. As many of you have shared, they've been of benefit in the past. We've been looking at First Peter. We're in the 5th chapter. In fact, we probably have a couple more weeks this week, and maybe next week we'll try to wrap the whole book up. And for those of you who care about these kind of things, we're going to move from First Peter into 2 Peter. And so I'm looking forward to moving into that text. And it's been a long time since I've had a chance to really focus on that text and teach out of it. So should be something good. But we need to finish up what we started, and that's what we're going to be about for the next couple of weeks. We left off in verse 6 of chapter 5, where Peter basically said to us that that younger people should submit themselves to the elder people, that is, those who are older and more mature, both in the faith and also generally in society, that younger people have a great deal to learn from older people, and they should treat them with respect and really seek out their wisdom and guidance in living their life. It's an interesting thing because my generation, we grew up, we thought we were much smarter than our parents, and so we kind of, didn't really pay a lot of attention to the things that our parents told us, the warnings they gave us, the directions they gave us. And yet, as we got older, we got smarter. It's like Mark Twain once said. He said that when he was 14 years of age, he believed that his father was the dumbest man on earth. And when he turned 21, he was amazed how much his father had learned in 7 short years. And that's kind of like what happens with most of us. We begin to realize as we have to take on the load of responsibility of adult living, that we really need some others to speak into our lives. And so I assume that most of you are, older than you're past those early years in your life, and you have time to listen to these kind of podcasts. But the point is that you need to also be really willing to talk into the lives of young people. I think we assume many times that they aren't interested in hearing what they have to say. And unfortunately, they are. Many times they really want somebody. And the problem I find so often is in family situations anymore that moms and dads tend to be so busy, they're kind of going from pillar to post, especially in our current economic situation, that many of them don't have time to really stop and spend quality time, if you will, with their kids. Fewer and fewer families sit around the dinner table, which was something that was basically a given in my day. And so the chance of interacting together and sharing our life experiences together are becoming increasingly limited. In fact, young people, for the most part, are spending a great deal of time on other social media devices, and they're looking to one another to connect, to get advice, which is really, the blind leading the blind. Jesus said they'll both fall into a ditch. And so I think it explains a lot of what's happening with young people today. But he also gives this warning, and we left off last week. He said that God resists those who are proud, and he gives grace to those who are humble. And so if you're older and you're more mature, you need to share what you've learned and what you understand, but do it with a degree of humility. And that's really where we want to pick up today in our reading, where in verse 6 of chapter 5, Peter says, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time." I think this is one of the greatest challenges in life, is learning how to walk in humility. I don't think humility is native to our human nature. In fact, without really kind of learning at the school of Christ in his discipleship, I think many of us may think we're humble. We may be able to display a meek exterior, but inside there's a person who's raging to have the opportunity to be seen and heard and recognized and even applauded. We've bought into the narrative that we're in this world for a special purpose and we got to make our point. And I don't deny that God has a special purpose for your life, but it may not be to become a celebrated person, a celebrity. That some of the most effective people in this world are not the people who are trying to find the limelight and get the headlines. They're the people who are just doing the yeoman's work of every day, being responsible, fulfilling their duties and obligations to be husbands and fathers, mothers and wives, who go to work every day and provide for their children and hopefully set an example for them. Because what we know now, as we look at it sociologically, what's the real point of decay in our culture now is the fact that that's not happening, that most people are so caught up in how they can live their best life now. The idea of living a life of service and sacrifice to others falls way down the list. And so as a result, we have a generation that becomes incredibly self-seeking, much along the lines that Paul warned about in 2 Timothy chapter 3, when he said in the last days there'd be perilous times because people would be lovers themselves, lovers of money, lovers of pleasure. And he said, and they'll love those things more than they love God. In fact, they may have a religious profile, but he said they have a religion that's void of the power of God's Spirit. And so one of the most powerful ways in which God works in your life is to bring humility into your life, to humble you in your own eyes. And unfortunately, in order to do that, sometimes God has to humiliate us in front of other people. In other words, put our ordinariness or even our lack of ability and intellect on full display so other people can see it and even, unfortunately, make fun of it. That's a very painful thing to go through. And I know that every one of us has gone through that. You may have grown up in a household where you were belittled a lot, and you think that that has made you humble. What it tends to do is make you very resentful, and you're afraid to maybe put yourself out there with your own ideas and your own thoughts. But at the same time, you really want to inside, and you resent the fact that people don't applaud you and recognize you the way that you feel you should be. And what we have to recognize is that God doesn't really enjoy that in us, because we have nothing to boast of. We are all sinners. We've been saved by grace. And if God were to force us to really see a video recording of our hearts as we go through every day, we would probably be really embarrassed and hope that nobody else sees it. Again, it was something that Mark Twain said, that we all have a dark side like the moon, and we hope that nobody ever sees it. And it's owning that reality, that fact of our own sinfulness, that brings into our lives a kind of brokenness, and it's out of that brokenness comes true humility, that God becomes the center of our life, and we become just those who are there to fulfill whatever He wants. There's no job that's too below us. There's nothing that we can't be called upon to do. We have to be available for whatever God wants. And sometimes God wants us to do some really, really humbling things. And I find that that's really hard for a lot of people, because especially in this generation, they've grown up with a teaching that basically they're the most important person in the world. They're number one. They've got to take care of themselves. They may make sure that nobody else takes advantage of them. And so they're always kind of on an aggressive path, but at the same time, there's kind of defensiveness. And then they kind of wonder, why am I so alone? This is really manifested, I think, what happens with social media, where people can portray themselves as in their best light, which really becomes an artificial avatar of who they really are. And as a result, they're afraid to really get into one-on-one relationships. So this has led to an epidemic of loneliness in our culture, because a lot of people are afraid just to say, hey, I'm a flawed human being, and I need friends and I need help. And that's why Paul says, you have to begin by Peter, you have to begin by humbling yourself, and you do that by putting yourself under the mighty hand of God. You let God put you low by His working in your life. And He does that through a variety of circumstances that you may not have anticipated and planned for, but nonetheless, they are designed to make you look small in your own eyes. Now, this may sound very unattractive to you at this point, but we'll pick up this conversation tomorrow, and I hope you're curious enough to tune back in to find out what I have to say. Until then, keep yourself under the mighty hand of God. Blessings.